It is amazing what we're able to empathize with someone we've never met. We can feel for someone through their story being shared on the internet. You'd think this great surge in empathy and connectedness would make the world a happier place. But there's a dark side to empathy. We have long associated empathy with a myriad of positive emotions, but today we're uncovering the unfortunate dark truth about empathy, because it's important to recognize that while empathy is valuable, too much of it can lead to emotional burnout, blurred boundaries, and even manipulation. By discussing this, our goal is to help people find a healthy balance and protect their mental and emotional well-being while still being compassionate. Devil's advocate. We can practice empathy, but being empathetic isn't a choice. When you hear gossip or rants, it's possible that instead of sympathizing for your friend, you may feel compelled into taking into account not just your friend's story, but also the person they're talking about. After all, an empathetic person can't help but relate in some way to both parties. Unfortunately, you may end up coming across as playing devil's advocate, and instead of feeling supported, your friend may accuse you of defending the other party. Empathy is a great feature to nurture in all of your relationships, but being empathetic might not always be helpful. Unreciprocated. We aren't all as empathetic as one another. When there is an imbalance of empathy in a relationship, you may end up feeling like you are the only one putting in the effort to relate to them and their struggles. But some people are just more empathetic than others. It can come down to the way you were raised, your life experience, or even genetics. It's true, your biology can affect your level of empathy. Psychiatrist Henrik Walter published a study in which he indicated that there is evidence that oxytocin and dopamine play a role in how empathetic you are. In relationships, when one has a higher level of empathy than the other, it can sometimes lead to feelings of loneliness. When we're constantly taking on the heavy emotions of our friends and loved ones, it can lead to relationship burnout. Of course, your relationships can benefit from empathy. Sharing your partner's joys and concerns can bring you closer together and can help a lot in conflict resolution. A study published in Trends in Cognitive Science points out that empathy can be really helpful in relationships and does benefit your relationship satisfaction. However, the study goes on to reveal that while empathy is great in certain contexts, it can be extremely damaging in others. For example, if you are an empathic person and your partner is experiencing a lot of negative emotions, that negativity can spread to you like an infection. After all, misery loves company. Another example is if your partner is having doubts and worries about your relationship and thinks it should end. As an empathic person and being able to feel what they feel and understand their perspective, you might agree with them rather than fight for the relationship. Emotional availability. Empathetic people are extremely emotionally available. That sounds great because it's nice to be a friend or partner who people can rely on. Unfortunately, this also means that your emotions are available to be used against you. The people around you may take advantage of the fact that you're more likely to agree to things despite it not being very beneficial to you, or will be more forgiving of them because you can understand their point of view and see where they're coming from. Similarly, empathetic people who have suffered abuse can simultaneously feel traumatized and hurt over the abuse while also rationalizing and feeling sorry for their abuser. As an empathic person, you take on all of the strong feelings of your significant other, friends, and family. The more you're there for people, the more you risk becoming completely emotionally burnt out, especially when you don't have any boundaries in place. Vicarious trauma. The more empathetic you are, the more likely it is that other people's trauma will affect you. Vicarious trauma is usually a challenge for first responders and therapists who are put in the position to deal with trauma victims often. As the name implies, vicarious trauma is when you empathetically feel for some of the trauma and pain of the people you're treating. As someone who has a great deal of empathy and who wants to help people often, you may find yourself faced with vicarious trauma, and without being in a field like therapy, you may be ill-equipped to deal with it. In the age of the internet, vicarious trauma can take a new form in people who focus on global humanitarian issues a lot. It's great to want to help people and spread awareness of global issues, but the more invested you become, the more it will negatively affect you. It's great to fight against injustice, but you have to be careful that taking on all of that trauma doesn't make you more bitter and angry. After all, we need to be optimistic to believe we can achieve change. If you don't have trauma of your own, being exposed to other people's trauma can make you quite sensitive to the things that trigger the person you are empathizing with. For example, if they went through sexual assault, you may feel especially disgusted or defensive when it comes to sex in your own life. This is another example of empathy being unhelpful. Taking on that trauma doesn't lessen the trauma for the other person. As you mirror someone else, you expose yourself to the emotions they feel, whether it be their sadness, anger, or even shame. You may even feel responsible for the trauma they went through. Not only is this not helpful, it's actively harmful. It damages your mental well-being, and it may also be quite insulting or offensive for the person who actually went through the abuse. Vicarious trauma can also lead to burnout. There is only so much a person can take before they're completely emotionally overwhelmed. A study examining vicarious trauma, empathy, and burnout in therapies found that vicarious trauma and empathy can make therapists vulnerable to burnout. And if that empathy and trauma go unchecked, they start to show signs of getting burnout. So if you're the person with the open heart who takes on the pain and trauma of the people in your life, you need some form of defense in order to not burn out. Is confidence the key? Being empathic isn't really a choice, so we need ways to ensure that our empathy isn't used against us while still being a caring individual. When taking on those feelings, look out for clues as to whether you are taking on too much. Do you find yourself ruminating on emotions? Is there a practical purpose in holding on to these emotions? Practice mindfulness. And as someone who is empathic, be aware of the fact that you are susceptible to people taking advantage of you. Increasing your confidence will help you stop feeling responsible when someone is trauma dumping on you and allow you to avoid burdening yourself with too many negative emotions. Building your confidence can also allow you to act with more compassion rather than empathy, which allows you to be more goal-oriented and helpful to the other person. Everyone should have some empathy. Compassion requires some empathy, but we shouldn't forget that empathy isn't the only thing that makes us good. Having sympathy and being compassionate are often more helpful than being empathetic. There isn't anything wrong with being empathic, especially because it isn't always a choice. But as empathic people, we should be able to monitor our empathy and ensure that it isn't making things worse for ourselves. You don't have to feel worse to make someone feel better. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by leaving a like. And what are some ways that empathy has been good or bad in your life? We'd love to hear your experience in the comments. Remember to subscribe to Psych2Go for more videos like this. And we'll see you next time, Psych2Goers.